So today we are going to look at effective transitions, but we're looking at the key point of transitions. So that primary, from early into primary and from primary into secondary, but while recognising that all transition, particularly around attendance, is really important. Today, these are the aims that we're hoping to explore with you. We are going to give you some exemplification in the end and what that can look like and what typical package of transition data will be useful. But before we dive into this, I want to first of all just have a wee chat about why. Why is it so important for us to look at these points of transition? And I'm going to go over just a little bit of data with you first. So at the moment, this is Scotland's attendance. This is what the picture looked like this time last year in June 2020. This is the last aggregated national data we have. And unfortunately, or fortunately, our early years data is not collected, and that's for a whole variety of reasons. That's because some people are on 52-week establishments, some people are on a school timetable. So that data is not collated and aggregated, and also, as we all are aware, our early years attendance is not compulsory either. But let's have a look at this data here. So what we have here is we have our totals. So our totals are up here. I think it's also important to recognise that while we have definitely seen a harder impact from COVID, I think it's important to recognise that this downward trajectory in attendance did not happen because of COVID. It was on a downward trajectory since 2017. But let's have a look at this here. So here are our primary. That's our primary in June last year, and this is our secondary. So if we're talking about transitions, what we're saying here is that is a really, really important thing to pay attention to, because we see...
phone me back. Sorry, I've clicked into that meeting, right? I've put the camera off and everything. It was just to see.
Thank you. So we see that there's a big drop between primary and secondary. So that again is a very good indicator of why we need to be paying attention to transitions. And I also want to have a wee look at persistent absence. So this is anything that is above 10% absence, okay? Less than 90% attendance. And again, you're going to see that jump between primary and secondary. But what I want to point out is that jump can be predicted. You know, this is a piece of research that was put together by Shapley Juni. And I want to just have a really close look at this data here. Now, our first column, it's a lot, it's quite overwhelming. So let's just take a wee minute and actually look at what we're looking at here. So this is all attendance, okay? And what we're seeing here is that if you're pretty much coming to school most of the time, there's no real ups or downs. You'll see a steady trajectory between authorised and unauthorised. We'll also see that for those children who have consistently low absence. But we will then begin to see, you know, for those children who maybe have moderate absence, you'll begin to see that split between unauthorised and authorised. It's English data, this is not Scottish data, but it is, you know, things don't necessarily change just because you step across the border. I want to have a look at these three at the end here. Okay, so this is moderately increasing unauthorised absence. This is strongly increasing authorised absence, and this is strongly increasing unauthorised absence. It is the English system, so it's primary 1, primary 3, primary 5, primary 7, and then we go up and we jump to S2, and then we jump to S5. Okay, look at this here. Those unauthorised absences here seem fairly, you know, they're quite low level whenever they're in primary school. When we hit that P7 stage, we then see a rapid acceleration. So if in your school and your local authority, you are seeing that spike around third year, you know, moving from first all the way through, and you're seeing it, a massive spike by the time you get to third, fourth year, it's really important to have a closer look at actually, well, is that predictable? Okay, and authorised here is pretty stagnant. But again, here we go. And what we've found is that in our last set of data that was collected nationally, the amount of unauthorised and authorised absences are now are on kind of par with each other with regards to trends. They're both moving, you know, much faster, whereas previously authorised absence was fairly low. So we're seeing big spikes in that. But again, look at this. If we're seeing a strong picture, even in primary one, this is 95% here attendance. We can begin to see that picture, and it becomes quite jaggy in primary 5. Flattens out a little bit, but again, the spike happens later on. And the same for unauthorised absence. So if we're saying that these spikes are really clear to see, and we can see that that's happening around primary 7, first year, then this really gives us a really strong argument for making sure that we are getting our transitions right, that we're passing on the right data. And I want to just cover a wee bit today about, well, what could that look like? Who are those groups that, for instance, we maybe want to be putting in our radar, who might still be sitting at 95% attendance at the moment, but they're people we want to keep a really close eye on over that transition period. So we know that the people who are more vulnerable to low attendance are children impacted by poverty. We know that secondary pupils, that's where we see that spike. Young people from gypsy travelling communities, and of course children with additional support needs. Those children are young carers, those children are care experienced, and also those that have experienced exclusion. And then that last one there is around anxiety, and we are definitely seeing a spike in the number of children who are struggling to be in the building of school. So again, that doesn't start in third year. That takes a time to develop. We also need to be really clear about understanding the reasons for absence, because if we don't understand the reasons for absence, we're not going to be able to address the reasons for absence. And also, whenever we are talking about transition, how are we taking our time to actually pass on? If we've got children with fairly low attendance at the moment, how are we passing on? What are the reasons for that? And how do whenever we're passing on to the high school, are they aware of the reasons? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just give you a minute thinking time. And just have a wee think, maybe choose one child that you're aware of in your school, or if you're on a local authority, think of one of your schools in general, and just think about what information are you passing on currently. I'm going to be quiet just for 1 minute. And believe it or not, that is just 1 minute. Who knew that a minute lasts as long as it does? And I suppose if MD ever asks you now, do you have a minute? A minute is actually quite a lengthy period of time. Anyway, so when you're thinking about what information am I passing on, am I only passing on, here's where they were in June. Am I passing on, I'll be passing on a whole lot of GIRFEC information about children with that really low absence. What am I passing on as well? And I suppose it is about thinking about those risk factors. If we're saying now that even children at 95% can possibly predict where their attendance is going to decline whenever they hit third year, we need to be really clear about what are those risk factors and how, of course, can we mitigate those. So we've talked a minute ago about those that are vulnerable, and it is about establishing an early warning system. We want to be able to, as soon as a child walks into first year or is walking from nursery into primary 1, we want to know who are the children at risk. Who are those children? We also want to know patterns for cohorts. Is it Fridays? Is that cohort as well as individuals? But as that cohort, is it a Friday? Where we see high absence, or is it a Monday morning? Because again, that can help you design your curriculum so that possibly if PE is a draw, if it's a pull into school, that PE can in fact be the thing that's happening Monday mornings for first year. Because if we can really focus in on first years, and we can focus in on primary ones, then hopefully we can break this trend before it even begins. We also want to be aware of the pupils who are attending but arrive late. We know late coming is an early warning of absences to come. So we want to make sure that as well as passing on overall attendance, we need to know who is arriving late. And I don't mean 5 minutes late. I mean really kind of 15, 20 minutes late, an hour late. Who are those learners who are not coming to school on time? Who are those learners who are telling us that they don't want to go to school? Because we need to pay attention to that, because while they're in primary or they're in nursery and their parents might be bringing them to school, eventually they'll be making the decision about whether they're coming or not, regardless of what their parents want for them. And we need to be really clear about what barriers that pupil is facing. So if we know that this is the reason, go back to those 4 reasons, if we know what the reasons are, then we should be able to put in place mitigations to make sure that, you know, if we don't, say for instance, we don't have any friendships, maybe it's our peers, it's the issue, then we can make sure that in those first few weeks of school, and we know the first 2 weeks of school is really, really critical in determining what the rest of the year looks like. So we can be put in place things that will mitigate the barriers. And the fact that, you know, the primary or the nursery have possibly trialled those and they might know what works and what doesn't work, those are really important pieces of information for us to be passing on. Okay, and that is really, it's just as important as passing on the data. It's really important to pass on what has been tried and what is impacted, but equally what has been tried and made no difference. We know the amount of energy that's going in to support attendance around the country, and not everybody's getting the results back for the amount of energy they're putting in. And it's really important that we understand before we put energy into something that we know already doesn't work, that we're passing that on. So it is about having a thorough conversation with the nursery or with the primary school for that cohort, as well as individuals, but for that cohort to say, this is what's worked for us, but equally, we tried this and that didn't work. And the last one on this list as well is also really important, fostering that family support. And we're going to hear from Alan in just a minute, who is going to really talk in a wee bit more depth about how do we foster family support, how does that work in the early years, but also how can that transfer as well up into that transition point from primary 7 into secondary. And I think it's also important to remember that absences, attendance is a behaviour. It's something we all do. You've all decided to come here today. You've all decided to attend. You know, you'll have various barriers that have, you know, you've had to overcome to get here. But absence is something that's just a symptom of whatever else is going on in that child's life. And this is getting it right for every child. This is about us understanding what those barriers are and making sure that if we've put energy into that, that we are passing that on. If they're going to another establishment, but equally the other establishment is seeking to find out and really understand, you know, what are the barriers and what has been successful. So I want to come to this, and I always really like this as a framework for actually what is a positive transition. And Alan, I think, is going to pick up on this in a wee bit more depth. But I think it's important to remember, yes, we do want to be child-centred. We do want to be thinking about individuals. We also want to be thinking about cohorts, but we have to be thinking about how are we working together, how are we passing on that information really effectively, how are we collaborating. We also need to be thinking about our culture and how we value not just the individual information, but the cohort information. And also, how are we going to be consistent with this? How is this going to be part of your policy in the future whenever you are looking at how effective your transitions are? So I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to ask Alan to come on and share for us.
No problem. I'll just get my PowerPoint up, Liz.
Thank you, Alan. And while you're getting organised there, can I check, Mrs. Jacobs, are you okay now? Did you manage to resolve that issue?
Hi, yes, no, one of my colleagues is on their computer, so it's fine. Thank you.
Perfect. Brilliant. That's great news. Thank you. Okay, Alan?
Yep. Thanks, Liz. So good afternoon, everyone. As Liz has said, my name's Alan Fleming and I'm an Education Officer for Early Learning Childcare Education Scotland, although my full background is as a nursery and primary teacher and senior leader across ELC and primary. So this is something that's really involved in the work that I do in ELC, but obviously the experience of doing this across from ELC to primary and primary to secondary also comes into play here as well. And I'm here to talk to you today about how transition principles can span across the stages, as Liz has said, across those stages of a child and young person's education, and how not only engaging the child, but equally as important as engaging the parents can support attendance from the early years of a child's life onwards. So let's have a quick look at what we know just now about effective transitions. And Liz has already touched on the 5 C's from Realising the Ambition, but I'll go into that in a wee bit more detail. But what does research tell us about high quality transitions? Realising the Ambition, being me, or RTA for short, was written for those working with children in their early years. And early years is defined in Scottish policy as children from 0 to 8. So it's not, when we say early years, we don't mean ELC, we mean that crossing from ELC into primary. And many of you will know in the call that RTA should be used across ELC and primary. However, what you might not know is that although this is a document for those working with children aged 0 to 8, lots of the principles in Realising the Ambition can be used right across the education sector from pre-birth to 18. For example, Realising the Ambition focuses on child-centred practice and the voice of the child. And this approach can be used to support children aged 4, but equally, the principles apply to a young person who's 15. It's about knowing children as individuals and young people as individuals and listening to them, planning learning and facilitating it in a way that meets their needs. And that is the same for our transitions. And another key section, if you've not looked at Realising the Ambition, is section 8. And that is a full section on high quality transitions. And it can be found on page 88 of Realising the Ambition. And I'd encourage you to read it if you haven't already. And while reading this section, I want you to look at it from your particular lens. What do these principles mean for children and families moving from ELC to primary, or from primary to secondary, or even from year to year? Realising the Ambition talks about these horizontal and vertical transitions. And Section 8.2 focuses on what we can learn from research on transitions, and much of the research into early childhood transitions focuses on the move from ELC into school. However, there is also those horizontal transitions that happen day to day. Okay, so very quickly, I know we're not looking at that specifically, but actually it's important to consider this when we're thinking about attendance, because for some children, that transition from one class to the next, or from one adult to the next, can have as big an impact as starting in the actual setting itself. So Realising the Ambition 8.2 goes into some detail around research done by Vogler, and it looks at the key difference between horizontal and vertical transitions. Today, we're going to focus on those vertical transitions, and Kagan and Akishjo refer to the transition between different educational settings, such as when they move from ELC to primary or primary to secondary, as those vertical transitions. And vertical transitions involve major changes for children and their families. Burns 2018 suggests that children and their families often have to adjust socially and culturally to a new set of routines and rules. And what I want you to reflect on today as part of your transition processes, is that the role that you see for parents? Is it that they're the people that have just to assimilate the rules that you have set within your settings about when a child should be there, or when they shouldn't be there, or what they should do when they are there? Or are they active parts of that transition process? Realising the Ambition tells us that transition is a complex and dynamic process, and that to better understand it, we need to be aware of how each child's or young person's development is influenced by that direct and indirect experience of their particular social and cultural context. So I suppose we ask ourselves, what does that actually mean? Well, we need to think about where children live and their families and how they grow and learn. So it's not just about the child. And so often in transitions, we can focus on getting a child-centred transition right for children, which is absolutely what we should be doing. But often the parents and families can be an afterthought around that, and that they can often just be the people that need to get them where they need to be rather than being that active part of the transition. The transition from ELC to primary or primary to secondary is a big step. A positive supportive transition at this stage, as Liz has already said, is likely to influence whether children are able to develop to their full potential at school, both academically and socially. And you'll see that the quotes on the screen there, especially that bottom left one from Dunlop and Fabian, the way in which the first transitions are handled could potentially have a significant impact on children's capacity to cope with change in the short and longer term. So in other words, if we get these transitions right from the very start, whether that's from our youngest years from into primary or into secondary, then that can make all the difference between a child who ends up settled and attached to a setting or a child who feels disassociated or not comfortable in that setting that they're in. And a number of researchers have demonstrated that previous positive impacts can decrease or even make or can even disappear if those transitions are not well managed. And that can arise from a lack of collaboration and communication between families and schools. It could also be that our transition process is something that we've always done this way, so we just keep doing it. And you might have noticed that at the start of this presentation, it was called Transitions Tick Done. And I'm going to come on to that in a wee bit more detail in a moment. It's clear that transitions can create a risk to children's well-being, their progress and their development if we don't get it right. However, alternatively, they can be a tool for positive change, and they can create opportunities to improve outcomes for children and their families. When we think about this from an attendance point of view, we need to consider not only the child, but their family as well. And if we reflect on that Dunlop and Fabian quote at the bottom, if we get this transition right from the start, it will contribute to children and their families having a positive experience and feeling more secure and attached in that setting. And when we move through this, I want you to reflect on at what stages are parents truly involved in the transition process? Where are their voices heard? I know that coming from an ELC perspective, we spend a lot of time getting to know parents because the structures in ELC allow for that. The parents are in the building most of the time. We're getting those relationships built up. We work hard to get to identify those parents that we think are anxious or worried or have got their own difficulties, and we try and work with them as best as we can. But quite often, those parents aren't identified to schools. So children in those risk categories that Liz pointed out, first of all, are identified and those enhanced transitions often take place. But have we ever considered that actually for a lot of our parents that they need enhanced transitions? How do we make sure, and the question I want you to reflect on is, how do we make sure that we are capitalising on that great work that happens to get to know the parents and move that relationship on into primary and on into secondary? Because again, 7 years worth of relationships will have built up in the primary school, and how do you in secondary then capitalise on that too? So for me, there's an aspect of, I know that there could be up to 15, if not more, different ELC settings going into the one school, and there could be maybe 7 or 8, or if not more, primary schools going into a secondary. So I'm not sitting in this call saying that we should be meeting every single parent individually, because that obviously wouldn't be feasible, but are there mechanisms in place for settings to be able to pass over that information about those key parents or families that have got their own anxieties that we can then support as they move through? Liz reflected on the 5 C's earlier, and Marion Burns, as part of her research into early childhood transitions, identified these 5 C's of positive transitions. And as you reflect in this session and what it means as you evaluate your current practice, please consider how you include those 5 areas within your current transition processes. You can use these 5 words as a type of checklist. So in what ways are what I am planning to do promoting child-centred practice? How are we getting the voice of the child? In what ways is it effective communication? Is everything one way? Quite often in transition processes, it can be, you've got to be here at a certain time, this is what's happening, this is what you've got to bring. But how do we get the voice of the children and families back into that? Not just as an evaluation after the fact, not just how is that gone, but during that process. And how do we ensure consistency for children and their families? So, to support the focus not only on children but on parents, the Scottish Children and Families Transition Position Statement was published in 2019, and it recognises a number of things. It recognises the value of working together with children and their families. It recognises the importance of positive relationships, that positive continuity of learning, and there's been research done over many years by the OECD about the importance of not only transitions, pastoral transitions for children, but pedagogical transitions. How do we make sure that the environment that the children have been in isn't starkly different to the environment they're going to be in? And all of these things can truly support the child to feel safe, attached, and want to come into that environment. The statement was developed in partnership between the University of Strathclyde, the Scottish Government, Education Scotland, and a number of other partners. And it was informed by the work of the Scottish Pedagogies of Educational Transitions, a nice mouthful there, or POET project for short. But there was a number of Scottish Government funded seminars and conferences around this, and you can find, I'll share the QR code for this, you can find copies of these on the website. But what I'd like to do is just quickly, because I know we don't have a lot of time, but just explore some of these 6 principles in a little more detail. And when we're doing that, if we can focus on it from not only the child, but from the parent and family's point of view. So one of the 6 principles is around aspirations, and we know that aspirations are about what we want to occur in a long list of possibilities, whereas expectations is what we expect to happen. And the aspirations will be different depending on who you are. You'll have aspirations as the educator, parents and children will have aspirations as well. But aspirations are underpinned by the recognition that children are, from the child's point of view and from the staff's point of view, that they are capable, competent and creative individuals. And that's why it's really important that we put in mechanisms to get the voice of the child across. The minute you feel that something has been done to you, even as an adult, you disengage. You're more likely to disengage than you are if you feel that you're an active participant in it. So how can we make sure that the aspirations that children have, that excitement, if you're a parent and you've been with that wee one who's got that excitement, that wee bubble in their tummy of, you know, I'm going to the big school, how can we capitalise on that aspiration without overwhelming the children? Families' aspirations ultimately are that children will be happy and make a good start in any new setting. If you ask a parent, they'll say things like they want their children to be liked, they want them to be respected and encouraged. So what mechanisms have we got where we can support parents to show that that will actually happen? Because transitions can often be about the event, and that's why I'm talking about that tick done, we can focus quite often on the procedural aspects of transition. You know, here is the timetable, this is where they go, this is where they should meet, but actually, how do we focus on that more on that pastoral side and that emotional side for children and parents? If we move on to the expectations for for children are largely based on the expectations of parents, because they listen to parents. Who's been there when a grandparent said, oh, wait till you go to the big school, they'll tober you up there, or, do you know, wait till the hard work will start there. So what does that start to do in that child's mind? It starts to think, oh my goodness, this place that I'm going might not be as, inviting as my ELC setting, or actually I know my teachers really well in primary, but they keep telling me these teachers in the secondary school are going to give me loads of work and I'm really worried about it. So those parental expectations start to filter down into the child's expectations. So how can we support parents to show them that actually the experience that they had at that point in their school That's completely different to what school is like for children today. We need to try and shift parental expectations to support us shifting children's expectations. And if we can get that right with the parents, then that's half the job for us, because the children will be supported at home with the same messaging that we are giving in the education setting as well. Now, I'm not going to go through all of this because we don't have time for it. But one of the things I want to talk about in this page is the opportunities. Transitions offer a plethora of opportunities, both positive and negative, if not handled correctly. But those positive opportunities are that if you have got a child who has not been attending in primary, or has an attendance pattern in the ELC, although it's not statutory, where they're missing large chunks, that there's the opportunity to almost hit that reset button, use the data that you've got to find out, right, well, let's look at that pattern, as Liz has said. What is it about those days on a Friday? Is it that actually the parents work night shift Monday to Thursday, and a Friday they are absolutely shattered and can't get out, they're late getting up, so they just say, do you know what, it's one day. What's one day? So how do we capitalize on those bits of data that we have from the previous setting or the previous year to then make those positive changes? And often at those points of transition, parents see that as a change of setting, children see it as a change of setting or a change of time and space. So it's the key time where we can really latch onto those opportunities to make those differences. And the last two bits there are about participation and contribution. And that's just, I'm just encouraging you there to really reflect on what is the vital contribution that parents can make. They are the first educators of their children. They know their children inside out. And quite often, not always the case, but if you've got an anxious parent, quite often you might have an anxious child because they're around that environment. So again, if we can really look at the family dynamics and look at the positive aspects of how we can link in with children, with parents at those points of transition, it will make our jobs easier. An example of something that happens is, I know that I was part of a transition project in a learning community where they're looking at how can we meet parents in a safe space. So instead of inviting the parents into the school, the first time they met parents was actually in a local park with their children. And it was a neutral ground. This was an ELC into primary transition. It was a neutral ground. The parents didn't feel pressure that they were going into this formal building where they weren't comfortable. It was in the local area, so the parents, the staff were coming into their comfort zone. Another way that it's been done is that the deputy or the head or a principal teacher or even class teachers have come down to meet a small group of parents in the nursery. Again, alleviating the parents' fears that this is a new building that we're going into. The last time I was in school, it wasn't a positive experience for me. So we need to start thinking differently about how we manage transitions, and also not just do what we've always done. Look at what are the things that are having the best impact, look at the things that are working, why they're working, and try and grow and expand them. So I'm going to kind of round off now, Liz. Hopefully I've kept to time. I like to rattle on a bit, but hopefully I've kept to time. We've got time. So there's 8 recommendations that come from the transition paper, and I'll just let you read them. I'm not going to read them all out to you. Now, bear in mind, this transition paper was aimed initially at the transitions from ELC into primary. However, the principles and the rationale behind it can absolutely be applied from primary to secondary, or even from year to year. So the recommendations here, I would ask you to look at them side by side to your own transition practice. How are you linking your practices into this? I've not got time to show you just now, but there's a really interesting quote about the process of transition, and that just because we have 3 transition events, for example, doesn't mean that that's transition over. Transition is a psychological process, and there's lots of research into this, that actually transitions can still be happening way into after the child has started in the school or in the setting. And just because your events are over doesn't mean to say you can say, tick, done, that's the child transitioned, we're all ready to go in August, because we all know that that's not actually how it works. And you might have children who are distressed or showing distressed behaviour further into the year. And it's about looking at how can we continue that transition process for that child. And just because it's maybe not gone right at the very start doesn't mean to say that we can't get that back. But if we can plan for those eventualities before they happen, it makes it a lot easier. And I've already kind of spoken about this, really. Dunlop, Elaine Wendy Dunlop talks about looking at how we view transitions, and there's 3 different viewpoints. There's the first one that focuses mainly on the individual child's development and the readiness of the child. So you won't see in Scottish policy context anywhere the phrase school readiness. That's a phrase that you'll hear down in England, but in Scotland policy we don't have that phrase because it's not something that we necessarily believe in. There's also those that, on the other hand, look more at the structure around the child and their families. So, you know, is the school ready for the child? So you'll hear that, you know, we should be ready for the child and their family. But then you've got that third aspect that look at both. They look at where the child is at and their family are at. They look at the structures that are in place within the school and the setting, and they try and bring them together to make sure they're meeting that child's needs. And that goes for using data on attendance, whether that's child development or whether that's just getting to know the child and their immediate family. So I'd ask you to reflect, how do you view transitions, and how do you view your children and your families? So I'm going to finish off this section here. This is the QR code. Hopefully it will take you to the Scottish Early Childhood Families Transition Statement. And there's lots of further reading in there, and there's a very short version of the transition statement that is, I think, a double-sided A4, or if you wish, there's the much more in-depth version too. But I'm going to hand back over to Liz, and
Thanks very
let's
much,
carry on.
Alan. And I think what you're saying that is really important. It is much, much broader, and it's about really knowing our families and our children well so that we can make that smooth transition so that they want to come to school. So what we're going to do now is we're going to hear from Colin, who's going to talk a wee bit more about data and what data should be passed on at this time of year. So Colin, if you're okay to share,
Yep.
we'll hand straight over to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Can you see that okay, Liz? Yeah?
Yep, we've got it.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So hi there, folks. My name's Colin French, as Liz said. I'm a development officer at South Lanarkshire Council. I'm a primary background, and I did a lot of work in attendance when I was in school, and since coming to Centre, it's been part of my remit as well. So I'm going to talk to you tonight about some of the things that we've been doing in South Lanarkshire across the year with some of our schools, and we're hoping to upscale it to more of our schools next year. So very quickly, background, we've been working on something called the Test of Change project. It's involved 17 of our primary schools and 10 of our secondary schools this year. This is the second year of the project. And basically, we've tried to make it as reciprocal and reactive a process as was needed, essentially. We have tried to work with the changing landscape that is constantly shifting in terms of attendance post-COVID. So this project has... It's been a successful project this year. I'll talk about it more in depth in a couple of slides' time, but we're going to talk mostly about the data and how that's helped feed into the project. So what we've done in the Test of Change project this year, there's been 5 sessions throughout the year, and it's been really helping schools dig into what the issues are. And a lot of what both Liz and Alan have talked about tonight is what we've really tried to drive forward with the schools, and it's about partially understanding and sharing all the latest research and everything that's coming out. But a lot of what we've done this year has been trying to challenge the misconceptions of what schools have been trying to do in their own establishment. And one of the things we've really come across is schools trying to work within their sphere of influence. And when a lot of our schools first came in at the start of the year, they were hoping to take their children who were 70% attendance up to 95% attendance. And when we basically had a chat about it and said, keep working with those kids, of course, keep doing other things with those children, but you really want to work within your sphere of influence and look at the children who are potentially dropping from 95% maybe down to 92% and work on those small gains. And those strategies that we've worked on with the schools across the year, not that they've then taken into schools and work with all stakeholders, so the children, the parents, the other members of staff as well, and try and make it everybody's business essentially has been one of the mainstays of our project this year. So in terms of data, and the main reason I'm here to talk this afternoon is what we've done with it this year and what's changed in the Test of Change project this year. So the first thing that we had to look at is what data we actually have and what we can receive from CMIS and what we can work with. The second thing we spoke about, and we continue to speak about, and I know every authority will be the same, is what is sustainable in this current climate in terms of capacity. And one of the things we were very keen to do is, although we're working very closely with the schools this year, is we want to make this a self-sustaining process, and the data that the schools get currently is something that they won't necessarily need the centre team for in the future. It's something they can work on by themselves, and essentially a lot of the heavy lifting is done, so they can then get on with the project of actually helping the children get into school. We wanted to make it manageable for the schools. We didn't want it to be a difficult or onerous process, and that's something that our schools this year have fed back that they've really enjoyed. They've enjoyed getting involved in the data, but involved in a nice shiny front end of the data where you don't have to worry too much about all the stuff that goes on behind the Excel that you'll see in a wee second. So we wanted to give them the facts. We wanted to talk to them about how you work with the data and how you can pass things like this up to the secondary schools in particular. But once you have the data, how you build a story around the children and then what actions you take is what was important. And we wanted to give them those facts quickly and easily to allow them to then go on to the important parts of building the story and actually trying to make a difference in getting these children into school. So what we started to use this year was an arm of CMIS that some of you might be familiar with. It's called Business Intelligence. It's something that we previously hadn't had unlocked for our primary schools, but we now are getting unlocked. And one of the big differences for Business Intelligence is that you can get the exact frame or the exact time frame that you want. So whereas most of you will know on Click and Go with CMIS, you might only be able to ask for the last 4 weeks or 8 weeks or a defined characteristic that you have to download. With Business Intelligence, you can set, as you can see from the wee screenshot there, you can set exactly what you want. So you choose your school, you choose the stages, and you choose an exact start point and exact end point. So you can look at weeks, you can look at terms, you can look at whatever date range you want. And something that we really liked about it is it brings all the characteristics down. So whereas on Click and Go, you can't really download the data, on Business Intelligence, you can just click download and it comes straight into a nice Excel for you, all the raw data, and it brings down all their characteristics. So it brings down, pardon me, their SIMD, it brings down whether or not they're free school meals, it brings down ethnicity, it brings down all the facts and all the data essentially that exists in CMIS. And most importantly, it's quick. To download a data set takes about 30 seconds. You just set these wee parameters up and then you download them straight away. And that was something our schools have really enjoyed. It takes away a lot of the long legwork, and I'll talk about that in a wee second. So I've got a very quick video here. I should just say that the video here, all the data is either example data or it has been redacted. So the start that you'll see here, all these names and everything, these are example. This is a dummy data set. So I'm just going to talk you through it as the video plays. So this is the raw data that you download from Business Intelligence, and what we've done is we've built a tool that does this all automatically for you. So you dump this raw data in, and then all you need to do is click the refresh button, as you'll see in a wee second. And then down here, the filter and view section, that straight away tells you the percentages. It shows you all the children's names, all their individual percentages, and something the schools were keen to have is how many actual days they'd attended as well. Over on the left-hand side, you've got all the slicers, and this all happens automatically. So you can choose straight away and see class attendances. You can see equity. So for South Lanarkshire, we look at SIMD 1 and 2 and free school meals. You can see pretty much any filter that exists on CMIS. If you want to look at an individual student, perhaps look at their surname and look at their brothers and sisters as well. You can do all these functions over here, and it tells you straight away, live from the morning that the data was put in, what their attendance is. So it's really good at diving quickly into exactly what's happening at this moment in time. And you can do this across stages. You can use multiple filters and do essentially whatever you want with it. What we also did is we built in a quick overview basically. So every time you download the data, this will show you exactly what's happening in your school in terms of attendance per decile or quintile, whatever it is you work in. And then it tells you all your raw data as well in terms of the makeup of your school. The second part of the tool shows a 5-year trend, which we thought was important as well. And this is something we built in after consulting with the school. So this is an example family that we've clicked on, and you can see straight away there's a bit of a concern there. They've went from 100% and they're slowly dripping down. And you can look at your primary one over the last 5 years. You can look at any stage exactly the same as the previous one worked. And I do apologise, this is very quick, but I'm just trying to show you that the fact that the tool can be clicked about very, very quickly, and you can get all the exact data you want at your fingertips without having to dig around for it or create your own spreadsheets or anything. So everything happens automatically. It's about 30 seconds work to download it, and then it's all straight into the tool there for you. So we also have an authority level one, which lets us see the 5-year trends in all the same ways, which is helpful for us, and it means we can talk to schools. So what we did was we spoke to the schools and we said, what do they need that will make a difference for them? And when we had a sharing good practice session a couple of weeks ago, all the schools did fantastic work, and their gains are, as I said, with the group we're working with at the moment, our increases in percentage are just under double the rest of the authority average. So our schools, the 17 primary schools we're working with, are making just under double the progress with their attendance. One thing we did notice at the sharing good practice is with everybody was still doing the same thing, and they were building up their monthly attendance for each child, and that's something we hadn't originally built into the tool. So again, we thought we're going to try and automate all the parts that we can, because that across the year, if you've got 100, 200, 300, however many children in your school, putting their monthly attendance in, that's going to build up to hours and hours for one person across that year. So we built in a tool that now makes it minutes. So I've got another very quick wee video to show you for this addition. So now what you can do in the tool is you can see all your children and how they've got on month to month throughout the year. So again, all the same filters apply. You can see whether or not your whole school, if there's any issues there. So there might be a wee issue looking straight away at March there. That could be the in-service day, something like that. You can look at all your classes individually, so you can click through and see what's going on with your classes. Again, you can look at your equity profiles, so no for your 3 to 10 and no free school meals. You can also, same all the time, you can look at your boys, girls, free school meals if you want to look at ASN. Again, you can choose multiple. So if you wanted to look at SIMD 1 and 2 and free school meals in primary 1 or primary 2, it basically does whatever you need it to do. You can look at exact groups of children. You can look at whatever you need to do. So if I was looking at primary 7 here as an example, there is going to be usually a drop off in December. But one I was interested in when I was looking at this one is that little dip in February and March, then back up to April. So as the person who's looking at attendance in my school, I might be looking at that little factor there and seeing if there's something we can talk about around there. And then what the schools were all still doing is they were creating these attendance spreadsheets. And this is something for the primary 7s that can go up to high school. But instead of this being hours of work, it's now minutes. Again, you can click on conditional formatting. You can do all the colours and all the nice stuff that we tend to do when we're in Excel. And this can all happen automatically as well now. So if I was to click on the whole amount, straight away I can click on conditional formatting. It's going to give me a nice clear outline of what's going on in my school. The final part we looked at was creating individual attendance trackers, and these might be the children who are in an attendance group or something you're working with. And similar to what Liz was saying at the start, again, this is all automated and this can happen automatically coming from CMIS now. You can see this example child's profile, and straight away I'm recognising that sometimes there's whole weeks off. I'm looking at Fridays, there's quite a recurring pattern there. There's a bit of a late recurring pattern. So this is something I actually used in my own school, and it's something that we showed the teachers, we showed the children, and we showed the parents as well. And this, I say black and white, but it's obviously very colourful, but this is right there in front of them in black and white, and you can see very quickly some of the things that are happening. And what this did in a school is it really challenged some of the misconceptions where perhaps the teacher thought a child was off all the time. And they actually weren't off that often. They were just off a particular day. Maybe it was writing day or something like that. So straight away, you've got an in there as to what the story might be. So this kind of school level down to pupil level, and then into months, and then into example pupil trackers for those who potentially need it, is how we were really looking at the data to then provide a story for people to work from. So then what we're thinking is, what will the secondary schools receive, or potentially the next class teacher? Any important data point, any important transition point, you can use it essentially whenever you want. But in terms of the data, our secondary schools will now be able to for the primary 7s from every school. And importantly, when we were speaking to the secondary schools, we wanted it to be in a similar style. They didn't want lots of different lots of different graphs and so on coming in from different schools. They wanted it to try and be consistent. They can look at the monthly patterns, and they can look at individual trackers as well. What that all does in terms of data is it builds the story. It gives the high schools the strong explanation of each child, exactly as Liz was saying and Alan was saying as well. Some of the things that have worked, some of the things that possibly haven't worked. The schools that we've worked with this year, all the learning and all the understanding that they hopefully now have around the pedagogy of attendance, if you like, and all the intel can go up with them as well. So you get all the numbers, you get all the facts and figures, but you can also get a much more detailed story about each child. And it then gives, hopefully, the secondary schools a firm starting point. Why we're doing it? We know that attendance tends to very rarely develop overnight. When they're going up to high school, there's probably a trend that's going to exist, and there's a trend that might continue unless we intervene. We shouldn't be waiting for children to fall from 100% on day one. And this is something that we're trying to speak to both our primary schools and our high schools about, making sure that just because they're on 100% attendance in August, we shouldn't be waiting for that to start dwindling. We should be trying to put things in place from the word go so these children are supported, and that we're all building a team around the child, as we all do in our own ways anyway. Of course, there's a huge amount of things that go on in our schools in terms of supporting children for attendance, but trying to get in there as early as we can and as best as we can with the information that has come previously from the primary schools to know what these child's little drivers and anything that might potentially work, and trying to link up that good practice as much as possible. So we're trying to basically create strong, easily accessible data that carves a clear path, and it makes life a bit easier for people, essentially. It gives people the stories and lets them know what's happening. Importantly, it gets the stories into the right hands. Is it the deputies that should be going up to in high school or pupil support? So we have that data package that can just go up and make life a bit easier for whoever's looking at it, and they don't need to be particularly proficient on Excel. And for everybody, it's about continuing to work on those small, achievable gains. And that is a very quick whistle-stop tour of the attendance from a data perspective that we've been looking at in SLC this year. And we're as an ongoing process, we're trying to develop it as much as possible to make it as easy as possible for the people who are going to make the difference. Thanks, Liz.
Can I just say thank you so much for going over that? And I think big message there is nobody starts from 100% come August.